after qualifying as an engineer and loving it, I ended up wanting to do something with my life. So I started moving elephants around in Africa and got into the privileged situation of chairing the elephant specialist group in Africa, meeting some of my world heroes, if you like, of the sustainable movement. And I was sitting with Ian Douglas Hamilton, who some of you may have heard of, enormously well-known elephant specialist, and he said, well, you know, why are you doing this as an engineer? And it's because I want to do some good. He said, well, why don't you do some engineering? And I think that's a great start point for why we're all here today. We're actually trying to do something, and the fact that it's not sexy like moving elephants around in Africa doesn't mean it's not really useful, and therefore quite sexy. So when it comes to sexy logos, kilowatts, IQ, intelligence, time. And a lot of us have been focusing on time today in terms of the time to deliver value and the time that actions are needed. In the break with Jeffrey was mentioning the fact that they were transparently quite new to the game, so to speak, but also having identified a target and then being pushed to get there immediately. And the fact is it's not possible. But time is the one totally limited resource for the planet, but also each of us individually. Go try and buy yourself another 5 years and you'll find it. Not many shops sell that. So I'm going to go deep dive now into, and some people have spoken about data analytics. So in a very specific domain, building use for multi-site companies. Some of the slides you'll see in a few minutes are basically supermarkets, university buildings, pubs, and so on. But we're going to focus on the data, so you will get out into the bar in about 15 minutes, so it should be okay. We've got an unhappy balance. Basically, costs, carbon, skills, which training takes up an enormous amount of resources, and of course time. And we're looking to deliver the goals, whether we call them scope 1, 2, or 3, numbers X, Y, Z, whatever they might be. Comfort, productivity, and auditability are the accountable factors for an energy manager. And they are distracted. They're distracted by buying decisions, they're distracted by carbon neutrality, they're distracted by comfort initiatives, having to show initiatives within their organization. And frankly, most of them don't have the time to do their work. So what we're focusing on is trying to make them some time. As we said, it's an impossible task. The traditional approach, when you're looking at a portfolio of buildings, so a few hundred supermarkets or whatever, is say, well, we're going to take the technologies that we think will work, we'll get our flagships, we'll invest all of our effort into these big capital buildings, and then we'll duplicate that everywhere else. And that is, if you like, the traditional approach to trying to get it right. And there's nothing wrong with trying to get it right, but flagships are expensive, there's not many of them, and most ships aren't flagships, and most of the energy isn't in the flagships. You seek to compare and correct. Are you comparing apples with oranges? Is always a good question. And of course, you have this concept of the ISO 50001, which I call find, do, validate, and learn. And all of these work. There's nothing wrong with them, but all of them are too slow to make them implementable. In other words, if you have 1,000 supermarkets, you can't fix everyone every day. It would be nice if you could. So we're saying that actually, rather than going for flagships by picking them, allow the data to pick the flagships. So in this example, we're looking at volatility. So at the end of the day, if you know the temperature outside, and you're talking about, say, gas heating, as we are in this example, if you know the temperature outside and you know the day of week, you should know roughly what you're going to spend in terms of gas. So you want to have a nice clustered plot like this along a line of outside air temperature. And a not so good one looks over like this over on the right. Not quite so pretty. The blue dots at the bottom, by the way, are COVID. But the outliers are the ones that need attention. They're the ones that are underperforming. This says that your targets don't need to be set. Yes, it should be, in the big picture, scientifically based targets, of course. But on a day-to-day basis, the best performers are going to be where your buildings cluster. So we're actually saying you can automate target setting, which saves a bit of time for the energy manager, and then look at the outliers. Pareto would suggest that roughly 80% of your waste will be in those outliers. So ideally, to save time, you need some form of assistant. And I think this describes it quite well, this idea that machine collaboration for data exploration can map on to the human. But while computers are doing very good at doing dumb things very, very fast, humans are better at doing things extremely slowly, but putting a little bit of quality into the game. So we're saying that you can use the machines to find opportunity, to offer diagnosis, to make suggestions, but then you have to have your quality check for false positives, false negatives, and feedback such that the AI or machine learning system can learn and improve the quality of the treatment you're giving. I should say we're working purely off our, sorry, I'm trying to use German, AMR data, automatic meter reading data, and postcode or location for weather data. We don't need opening hours, we don't need to know anything about what they do in the building, because actually the buildings cluster themselves into types. So a 24/7 building will look very differently from a building with opening hours, and the operational reality will be reflected in the data, whether it's good or bad. So here's another example. All of those plots on the left-hand side are, I think, pizza restaurants. And all of them close at night. And all of the ones on the top-hand left-hand side don't close at night, and all the ones on the bottom right-hand side do close at night. So why go through an exercise of creating a false target, which means nothing, which has to be related to weather, when the target is in the data? And that's basically a key point, we think, in terms of saving time, is to say to the energy manager, we can actually create your targets because it's implicit in what you're doing already. Follow the leader. And if you go for flagships, the best building for switching off in summer with heating is not going to be the same as the best building for volatility, and it's not going to be the same as the best building for turning off at night. So you need to have a set of KPIs that add together, don't double count, and actually focus on the ones that are good, or use those to identify our targets, and then look at the outliers and try and replicate what is working, but it is specific to the KPI. And hence flagships. Nobody is good at everything. And they change. So this is now looking at the idea that if you know what you've done in the past, much as a sportsman knows their personal best, maybe you can replicate it in the future. So some benchmarks relate to a model about what you've done in the past, and again, you can use that to set a target, but it's one target, but it doesn't mean what you're doing in the past is good. So there's a completely independent need to look at benchmarks, not annually, but nightly. Taking one of these, and in our case, clicking on it, opens up a new dialogue to save time. That outlier, we have a forecast and performance with the circles, the dots representing individual days of consumption, the black dots a recent waste event. We can quantify that quite obviously. It's basically measure the distance and add them together. And we can say to that energy manager, something's happened, it should be addressed. They don't have to look at a graph to do that. That's just a data feed to them via an API. Doesn't matter how they get the data. This is your priority. But then the question comes up, well, if it's a higher cost at the same temperature, what does it look like? And this one is a single pub. We've got a strange COVID event at the bottom. Then you've got pretty normal behavior running up against temperature, and then you've got these outliers. So the question then for the energy manager is, what do I do about it? Who do I get to fix this? And so you have to diagnose it. And again, the machine can do that for you. So green bunch, this is a week, I should say. So 7 days of the week. Green zone is what it looks like when it's doing well. Pink zone, what it's doing currently. If you compare the two and take the error, it could be overnight, which means your time clocks aren't working. It could be during the day, which means a boiler that is on a time clock has had its control system overridden. And you can get into quite specific diagnosis completely automatically. So you can issue a ticket to a system to say, go and fix this. In this case, they're heating over 20 degrees C. That was the identifier, if you like. The cause was a thermostat change on the 25th of October, the last year. In a pub, the impact was £8,000 worth of gas on that one event. If you think how many beers you can buy with £8,000, you want them to fix this. So from getting into the office in the morning, sitting down, saying I've got 1,700 pubs, and you could probably identify the organisation. 1,700 pubs in 3 minutes, you can know the very first thing you should address, the most immediate pressing need, quantified, what's causing it, where it's happening, so you can communicate it. And to conclude, I've been going much faster than I expected. Data represents reality. We all leave fingerprints when we commit crimes, whether it's because we haven't sterilized our hands because of COVID, or because we've done something even naughtier. And from our perspective, buildings leave fingerprints, and you can reverse engineer them. So this is a school, daily consumption, time of day, different temperature bands. And you can very quickly see there that basically it starts at 4 o'clock in the morning, summer and winter. You can also tell that they're not observing a summer-winter offset of 1 day, 1 hour, which means in the summer they're heating for 1 extra day in the morning, or the other way around, and in the winter, 1 extra hour at the end of the day. Just because someone hasn't commissioned and checked with that control system that it's doing what it was meant to do in the first place. At the end of the day, little ski slope, this is people going to pick their kids up from school, opening the doors, cold air rushes in, boilers fire, everyone goes home. A bit of a waste. Very specific KPIs. Sometimes we can get down to the size of a pump being too small for the size of the boilers. But at the end of the day, if you can generate forecasts automatically for the energy manager, if you can give them targets, so they've got their buying covered, they've got their objectives covered, they've got their priority, they've got their diagnosis, you've saved them an awful lot of time. And that means you can actually get on with doing something about it, which is our objective. What do we do? For a bunch of KPIs, we review each building each day for, I think, about 120,000 buildings at the moment. Enterprise clients, Marks & Spencer's, Tesco's, the Co-op, this, by the way, is the sales pitch slide, and working with a few industry players that you may recognize. We want to do more, obviously, but the key takeaway for us is that often what you need to do is buried in the data. You just need to expose it. It's not necessarily about being smarter, having a better technology. It's just literally using the resources you have to hand. If you're an energy company, you bill your clients. If you bill your clients, there's an energy reading of some form. If you've got an energy reading, you can work out what's wrong. And you don't need to reference anything outside that to get a daily action plan. And so that, I think, is, thank you very much. We want to know, well, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening for a few minutes, and let's talk over coffee, wine, beer, I don't care. Let's talk. Thank you very much.